Many people have heard of Quakers, but little is known about the role that they had in the settlement and founding of the United States of America. In this presentation, I will show how one Quaker family played a significant role in settling North Carolina, providing aid during the American Revolution, pioneering to the West, as well as fighting the ideals of slavery. Early immigrants came to the Americas for several reasons. Some came of their own volition, some against their will. Many sought an opportunity for land, while others sought peace. Some could only hope for freedom itself. It is unclear what brought two Irish brothers, but the story suggests it has something to do with a man named George Fox. The Sheridan family history that has been handed down over the years via records, family Bibles, and verbal retellings state that sometime in the early 18th century, two brothers, John and George Sheridan, came to America from Dublin, Ireland, and settled in North Carolina. The story goes on to say that they were staunch Quakers, fresh from the teachings of George Fox. George Fox was the founder of the Society of Friends, also known as Quakers. According to Fox, a God-given inner light rests above all creeds in Scripture. Fox maintained that personal experiences were the true sources of authority. He spent most of his life preaching and oftentimes was imprisoned. Towards the end of his life, he managed to travel to British colonies, including the Americas, to spread his teaching. The family story states that one of the brothers was killed by Indians. Whether this was one of the original brothers or a descendant is not known. George Sheridan, who is said to have been born in 1722, most likely moved to North Carolina from a northern colony. George married a woman named Hannah. However, her birthday and maiden name is unknown. Abner Sheridan, George and Hannah's eldest son, recounts in a war pension application that his father said he was born in Maryland. This would have been around 1759, and is the only source that gives a clue as to the possible past residence of George Sheridan. Many Quakers traveled from the north in the late 1600s, early 1700s to escape persecution. Sometimes that persecution resulted in expulsion from their colony or death. However, these are not the only trials the Quakers would have to face. In 1716, a campaign inspired Quakers to move into the Piedmont region, further west in North Carolina. By doing so, they would acquire 50 acres of land. By 1748, the Quaker settlement of New Garden was formed. Although times looked promising for the new Quaker settlement, hostilities would only be made worse in years to come. The American Revolution beginning started well before the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776. Over the previous 100 years, the ups and downs of English politics via changes in power, the results of the Glorious Revolution, and the 7 Years' War exasperated the back-and-forth tirades of Parliament and the colonies. This led to the revocation of charters, the dissolution of colonial settlements, the imposition of unjust taxes, and the refusal to allow the colonies to govern themselves. A century-long unwillingness to waver on both sides caused a stalemate which culminated into a bloody war. This war did not just happen between two contending governments, but between neighbors. It was a time of uncertainty for many, including George Sheridan. George and Hannah Sheridan lived in North Carolina in 1775. Although most of the records were destroyed during the war, the meticulous record-keeping of the Quakers provide evidence for this fact. John Sheridan was born to George and Hannah Sheridan in Guilford, North Carolina on July 22, 1775. John's birth is recorded by the Spiceland and Duck Creek meeting records in Indiana. This would suggest that George and Hannah lived in Guilford during the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. On March 15, 1781, in the early morning before the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, a small battle was fought between Colonel Bonaster Tarleton and Colonel Henry Lee. Nearly an hour of the battle was fought on the property of the New Garden Meeting House itself, and 3 hours of it amongst the Quaker community. Eventually, the battle moved to Guilford Courthouse. After the devastation, many friends came to care for the injured of both sides. Both British and American soldiers who were killed were buried at the New Garden Cemetery. The battle was fought over 1,000 acres of land, and some of the injured weren't found until days later. Most Quakers disagreed with the use of force and didn't support the war against England, but they also didn't try to stop it. This refusal to take action on either side caused many to think of the Quakers as treasonous. George Sheridan was one of those people. On account of his faith, he refused to fight in the Revolutionary War. He was accused at one time for giving aid to the Tories by feeding their outlines, to which he replied, "I am a friend to all friendly people and an enemy to no man." In addition to being persecuted and criticized, the Quakers were charged 3 or 4-fold taxes in lieu of their service. This seemed to be an amicable solution for the Quakers. However, they were also stolen from and forced to give their livestock to soldiers nearby. Abner, the eldest brother of John, joined the militia, but was discharged for cowardice. This could be due to the fact that excommunication from the Friends Society would have resulted in his joining. However, Abner rejoined and enlisted for 9 months in the North Carolina State Troops in 1783. One can only assume his joining could be due in part to the devastation he witnessed during the Battle of Guilford Courthouse only a few years earlier. In 1795, George Sheridan was given the deed to 124 acres in North Carolina. It took 8 years from 1786 for this land to be issued to him. The land was near Cane Creek, just some 30 miles east of New Garden. Slavery became a dominant issue in the area. Importation of slaves was banned and then repealed in 1790, but that wasn't the first time it had happened. The once again legal importation of slaves to North Carolina caused a substantial increase of slaves. In 1767, there were about 40,000 slaves. By 1800, that number had grown to 140,000. As opponents of slavery, John, Margaret, and their family found it necessary to leave North Carolina, while George and many other members stayed behind. In 1797, George Sheridan passed away, only 2 years after he received his land. Many Quakers from North Carolina moved through the Blue Ridge Mountains and Cumberland Gap in the early to mid-1800s. Because of this, many Quaker meeting places closed. There were too many families leaving the area. John and Margaret Sheridan first moved from North Carolina to Ohio, then on to Indiana. It is recorded in the Miami, Ohio meeting that they were received there on September 7, 1805. In the Henry County, Indiana genealogy and history page, it states that the first settlers in the area were young people looking to better their lives. Among those were John Sheridan and his family. John Sheridan is specifically mentioned. The family story states that John Sheridan's new barn was used as a Spiceland meeting place until a new log cabin could be built. John passed away on October 24, 1836. Margaret lives with their son William until her death on November 25, 1868. William Sheridan, the son of John and Margaret Sheridan, was born October 8, 1806. He married Elizabeth Schooley on June 25, 1829. They married in the New Garden Meeting House in Wayne County, Indiana. Although the Sheridans moved to escape the impossible circumstances of slavery, it appears that even hundreds of miles away they couldn't escape the problem. In the early to mid-1800s, a debate broke out amongst the Friends community concerning slavery and the lengths at which the community would go to end it. In 1842, the dispute resulted in a division among two Quaker communities, one forming the anti-slavery community and the other the body community. The anti-slavery movement believed that attacking the economy of the slaveholders aligned with their moral obligations. The body saw that alienation to their neighbors would be in a direct opposition to their doctrine of non-coercion. Both sides viewed slavery as wrong, however how they sought to resolve it differed greatly. William Sheridan and his family stood with the body on the issue, which believed that the gospel and a spirit of Christian love was the best way to achieve moral reform. The Sheridan family lineage suggests that William was hired to gravel the Durrett Pike. He and two others, Jesse Bond and Albert Newby, built a boarding house for pupils that was later named the Emma Charles Boarding House. William Sheridan maintained his religious upbringing and was planning to go to the yearly meeting in Richmond. He bought new trousers for the occasion. Unfortunately, while he was working in his orchard, he fell from a tree, which resulted in his death on September 23, 1870. He was buried in his new trousers. William's descendants will eventually move on to Missouri. However, the issue of slavery will not be a thing of the past. Much like the Revolution, the Civil War will pin neighbor against neighbor and brother against brother. Much can be said about Quakers, but their legacy in America is a rare achievement. Through trials, devotion, and an unwavering belief in peace, the mark left behind is nothing less than great. Thank you for listening to my presentation. This is Sarah Kennedy.